The sound of bare feet pivoting on tiles shouldn't have made Park Kim-jae's blood run cold. He'd orchestrated disappearances, commanded loyalty through fear, built an empire on the sharp edge of violence. But standing in the shadow of his own courtyard archway, listening to the rhythmic snap of movement cutting through the oppressive silence that had suffocated his home for 8 months, he felt something he'd buried the day he inherited his father's throne. Vulnerability. His daughter didn't make sounds anymore. Suri moved through the world like smoke, untouchable and insubstantial, a phantom in her own skin. The doctors called it selective mutism, triggered by severe trauma. Kim-jae called it the price of his choices. She'd been caught in crossfire she should never have witnessed, and now she existed in the spaces between his failures, silent and unreachable. But that sound, that deliberate, grounded, alive sound. He moved to the doorway, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon he no longer carried inside his own home. What he saw stopped him completely. Suri stood in the center of the stone courtyard, her small frame locked in a horse stance so perfect it could have been carved from marble. Her fists were chambered at her sides, her bare feet gripping the ground like roots. And beside her, mirroring the position with fluid grace, was the woman he'd hired 3 weeks ago to manage his household, Martha Chapin. The quiet, unassuming black woman with Chicago references and eyes that held too much weight for someone claiming to be running from nothing more than a bad relationship. She wore her standard uniform, black dress with white apron, but moved like water given form, each shift of her weight precise and intentional. Hannah. Martha's voice was low, rhythmic, a metronome of control. Duel. Suri's right fist shot forward, pulled back. Left fist extended, retracted. Her face held an expression Kim-jae hadn't seen since before that night. Focus without terror. Determination without the trembling that usually preceded her retreats into closets and corners. Set, Martha continued, her own movements flowing beside the child's like a shadow teaching light how to dance. Net. Kim-jae's throat constricted. His empire was built on absolute control. He could make grown men weep with a look, dismantle lives with a phone call, command rooms with his silence. But watching his broken daughter find strength in the hands of a woman he'd hired to dust his bookshelves and prepare his meals, he felt the foundation of everything he believed crack beneath his feet. Welcome to Ruthless Romance Tales. And honey, you just stepped into something that's going to rewire your entire understanding of power. If you've been riding with me, you know we don't do surface-level love stories here. We dive into the dangerous, the complicated, the kind of connection that forces you to question everything you thought you knew about strength and surrender. And if you're new, you're about to witness a collision between a man who controls an empire and a woman hiding secrets that could destroy them both. Hit that like button because you're already invested. Subscribe because missing what happens next would haunt you. And smash that notification bell because this story is about to take you places you never saw coming. Now let's watch how a maid with a past she can't outrun changes everything for a mafia boss who thought he'd already lost what mattered most. The woman turned her head slightly, and for a fraction of a second, her eyes met his through the gap in the doorway. There was no surprise in her gaze, no embarrassment at being caught, just a quiet acknowledgement that said she'd known he was there the entire time. Then she returned her attention to Suri, counting again in that steady, unshakable voice. Kim-jae stepped back into the shadows of his house, his heart doing something it hadn't done in years. It raced, not from danger or adrenaline or the thrill of a deal closing, from hope. From the terrifying realization that while he'd been busy protecting his daughter from the world, a stranger had walked into his fortress and started teaching her how to protect herself. And he had no idea who Martha Chapin really was. 3 weeks earlier, Martha had stood before the Park estate and made a decision that would either save her or destroy her completely. The building rose against the New York skyline like a monument to isolation. All glass panels and sharp angles that reflected the city back at itself without letting anyone see inside. Security cameras tracked her approach. The gate required fingerprint clearance. Even the air felt filtered, scrubbed clean of anything organic or real. She'd cleaned homes for wealthy families before. After Chicago, after the collapse of everything she'd built, she'd learned that invisibility was its own kind of armor. Rich people didn't see their staff. They saw functions. Someone to wash dishes, fold laundry, maintain the illusion that their perfect lives ran on autopilot. It was exactly the kind of disappearing act Martha needed. But this house felt different. It didn't feel lived in. It felt survived. The woman who'd interviewed her, Mrs. Kang, the estate manager, had been efficient and cold. Mr. Park values privacy above all else. You'll work 6 days a week, Sundays off. You'll have access to the main living areas, kitchen, and guest quarters. The third floor is Mr. Park's private office and is off-limits. The east wing contains his daughter's room and is also restricted unless specifically requested. His daughter? Martha had asked, keeping her voice professionally neutral. Mrs. Kang's expression had tightened almost imperceptibly. Miss Suri is 8 years old. She requires a very specific environment. You are not to engage with her unless absolutely necessary. She doesn't speak. The way she'd said it, like a warning and a dismissal in the same breath, had made something in Martha's chest constrict. She knew that tone. It was the same one her commanding officers had used when discussing casualties that were acceptable losses. Collateral damage. Children who fell through the cracks because the adults around them were too busy managing their own chaos. Understood, Martha had replied, even though she understood nothing except that a child in this cold mausoleum was suffering, and everyone was pretending it was normal. She met Park Kim-jae on her second day. He'd returned from a business trip at dawn, moving through his own home like a ghost visiting a life he no longer recognized. Martha had been in the kitchen, preparing breakfast according to Mrs. Kang's detailed instructions. When he walked in, the man was devastating in the way storm systems were devastating, beautiful and dangerous and impossible to look away from. Sharp features, dark eyes that assessed everything in seconds, a body that moved with the controlled economy of someone trained to react before thinking. He wore a black suit that fit like it had been borne on his shoulders, and when he looked at her, Martha felt the weight of a predator evaluating prey. "Miss Chapin," he said, his English crisp but accented. "Mrs. Kang speaks highly of your references. Thank you, Mr. Park. You're from Chicago." It wasn't a question. He'd already pulled her background, probably knew everything her carefully constructed identity wanted him to know. Martha met his gaze steadily, letting him see the exhaustion of someone running from something common, an abusive ex, a life that didn't work out, nothing that would raise red flags for a man who dealt in real secrets. "Yes, sir. I needed a fresh start." Something flickered in his eyes. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition of a fellow refugee. New York can provide that. If you work hard and respect the rules, I intend to do both. He nodded once, dismissing her, and turned to leave. But at the doorway, he paused. "My daughter is not to be disturbed. She has very specific needs. If you see her, do not approach. Do not attempt conversation. She's been through enough." The way his voice fractured on that last word told Martha everything she needed to know. This wasn't a man who didn't care. This was a man drowning in caring too much and having absolutely no idea how to reach the child he was trying to protect. "Of course, Mr. Park," Martha said softly. "I'll respect her space." He left, and Martha returned to her work, her mind already cataloging everything she'd observed. The security system that was military grade, the way the staff moved with terrified efficiency, the complete absence of anything personal or warm in the entire house, and most damning, the way Park Kim-jae looked at the closed door leading to the east wing, like a man staring at a grave he dug with his own hands. Martha had come to New York to hide, to be invisible, to let the woman she'd been in Chicago die quietly in this anonymous new life. But on her third morning, when she glimpsed a small figure darting between shadows in the hallway, moving like something hunted, she knew hiding was no longer an option. Some battles found you even when you were running, and this child, this silent ghost moving through her own home like an intruder, was about to become Martha's new war. Martha learned the geography of trauma by watching how Suri moved through the house. The child existed in patterns, careful routes that avoided open spaces and kept walls within arm's reach. She never crossed the center of a room, never stood with her back to a doorway, always positioned herself where she could see exits, even if it meant sitting on the floor in awkward corners that made no practical sense. It took Martha 4 days to map the route Suri used from her bedroom to the small library on the second floor. The girl would emerge at exactly 9:47 a.m., 23 minutes after her father left for his office downtown. She'd press herself against the wallpaper, moving in short bursts between furniture, pausing to listen before each movement. The journey should have taken 30 seconds. Suri made it last 6 minutes. Martha never approached, never called out, never did what every instinct screamed at her to do, which was gather this broken child and promise her the world was safe again, because Martha knew better than most that promises like that were lies, and children who'd learned the world was dangerous could smell lies from a mile away. Instead, she worked. She cleaned rooms Suri frequented, but did it in ways that created space rather than invasion. She left small things shifted, a chair angled differently, a window open to let in air, tiny disruptions to show that adults could exist in a space without destroying it. And when she moved through the house, she let her body fall into the rhythms she'd learned a lifetime ago in a Chicago dojang, where a Korean master had taught her that discipline was just another word for controlled breathing and centered movement. On the 5th day, Martha was folding towels in the linen closet near the library when she heard it. A small, sharp intake of breath, the kind of sound prey makes when it realizes it's been cornered. She turned slowly, her hands still holding a towel, her body language deliberately unthreatening, and found Suri standing 15 feet away in the hallway. The girl was tiny, delicate in the way that made Martha's chest ache. She wore soft pink pajamas at 11 in the morning, her dark hair tangled around her face, and her eyes were too wide, too aware. The eyes of someone who'd seen things that rewrote the basic rules of childhood. Her hands were pressed flat against her thighs, fingers splayed in a way that Martha recognized. Grounding technique. Someone had taught her to do that when the world felt too loud. They stared at each other. Martha didn't smile, didn't coo, didn't do any of the performative warmth that adults inflicted on children. She just stood there, breathing slowly, letting Suri see that she was safe, that Martha was simply a woman folding towels, nothing threatening, nothing that required fight or flight. Suri's gaze dropped to Martha's hands. To the precise, controlled way she folded each towel. The movements economical and measured. Martha had learned this fold in basic training, designed to maximize space and efficiency. She'd never thought about it as communication until she saw the way Suri's breathing slowed, matching the rhythm of Martha's hands. 1 fold, inhale, 2nd fold, exhale, 3rd fold, smooth, 4th fold, stack. Suri watched for 47 seconds. Then she turned and disappeared down the hallway, silent as smoke. Martha released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. She placed the towel on the stack and closed her eyes. She'd made contact, not with words or touch, but with something deeper, with the silent language of control in a world that felt chaotic. That night, Martha lay in her small room on the 4th floor, the staff quarters that smelled like industrial detergent and old carpet, and made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't save this child by being invisible. Suri didn't need another person tiptoeing around her trauma. She needed someone who understood that strength wasn't about pretending the monster didn't exist. It was about learning to face it without flinching. Martha had spent 2 years in Chicago running a program that the government didn't officially acknowledge. She'd worked with children pulled from situations that broke most adults, teaching them that their bodies could be weapons and sanctuaries at the same time. She'd been good at it. She'd saved 19 kids from cycles of violence they'd been born into. And then she'd lost one. A 10-year-old boy named Marcus, who'd smiled at her during their last session and promised he'd practice his forms. He'd walked out of the community center and straight into a gang initiation that ended with his blood on pavement she'd walked past every day for 6 months afterward. The investigation cleared her. The therapist told her it wasn't her fault. Her commanding officer said it was an acceptable loss in the larger war. Martha had resigned the next day and disappeared into the kind of anonymous grief that only happened when you stopped believing you deserved to help anyone. But lying in this sterile room, listening to the sounds of a house that felt more like a prison than a home, Martha realized that grief was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore, because Suri Park was drowning, and everyone was too busy protecting their own positions to throw her a lifeline. The next morning, Martha broke her first rule. She woke at 5 a.m., before the other staff arrived, and went to the courtyard. The space was enclosed by the house on 3 sides, glass walls looking in, stone floor beneath an open sky. It was private, protected, and perfect. She started with basics. Breathing exercises first, the kind that centered your awareness in your body rather than your spiraling thoughts. Then stances. Horse stance to build root, cat stance to develop balance, crane stance to teach patience. She moved through forms she'd practiced for 20 years, letting muscle memory guide her, feeling the familiar ache of her body, remembering what her mind had tried to forget. She didn't hear Suri approach. That was intentional. The child was already hypervigilant, already attuned to every sound. If Martha had made a show of noticing her, Suri would have run. Instead, Martha simply continued her practice, aware of the small presence in the doorway but giving it space to exist without acknowledgement. 15 minutes passed. Martha transitioned from forms to slow, controlled strikes. Punch, retract, kick, return. Each movement deliberate, each breath audible, creating a rhythm that was almost hypnotic in its consistency. Another 10 minutes. Martha risked a glance toward the doorway. Suri was sitting now, her back against the frame, her knees pulled to her chest. She was watching with the intensity of someone trying to decode a foreign language, her eyes tracking each of Martha's movements like they contained answers to questions she didn't know how to ask. Martha completed her form and bowed to the space, a gesture of respect her teacher had drilled into her. Then she walked to the side of the courtyard, picked up a towel, and wiped her face. She didn't look at Suri, didn't speak, just gathered her things and walked toward the house. She had to pass within 5 feet of the child to reach the interior door. As she approached, she slowed her breathing, made her footsteps audible, gave Suri every opportunity to retreat if she needed to. But the girl didn't move. She just stared up at Martha with those 2 old eyes, and Martha saw something in them that made her throat close. Hunger. Not for food, for something that looked like strength but felt like safety. Martha paused at the doorway. She didn't crouch down, didn't invade Suri's space. She just stood there, at full height, and spoke in the same low, rhythmic voice she'd used for her counting. The world feels too loud sometimes, but your body knows how to be quiet inside the noise. That's what the movements are for. Suri blinked, her hands pressed harder against her thighs. Martha continued, still not looking directly at her, giving her the dignity of not being studied. I'll be here tomorrow morning, same time. If you want to watch, you can watch. If you want to leave, you can leave. This space is yours too. She walked inside, leaving Suri sitting in the doorway. And she didn't let herself look back because looking back would have made it about her need to save instead of Suri's need to heal. That night, Park Kim-jae came home at 11 p.m. Martha was in the kitchen, wiping down counters that were already clean, when he walked in. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened, his jacket draped over one arm. He stopped when he saw her, his expression flickering through something Martha couldn't quite read. "You're here late," he said. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd make myself useful." He moved to the refrigerator, pulled out a bottle of water, and drank half of it without speaking. Martha continued wiping, giving him space to either dismiss her or engage. She'd learned in her previous life that powerful men needed to feel like interaction was their choice, not an imposition. "Mrs. Kang tells me you've been exemplary," he said finally. "Efficient, quiet, respectful of boundaries. That's the job, Mr. Park." "Yes." He set the bottle down with deliberate care. "It is." Silence stretched between them, and Martha felt the weight of something unsaid pressing against the air. She kept her movement steady, her breathing even, waiting. "My daughter," he said, his voice dropping lower, rougher. "Did you see her today?" Martha's hand stilled on the counter. She chose her words carefully. "I saw her in the hallway yesterday. I didn't approach. I know the rules." "Good." But the word came out hollow, like he was trying to convince himself that keeping distance was the same as keeping her safe. He turned to face Martha fully, and his eyes were devastated in the dim kitchen light. She used to laugh. "Did you know that? She used to run through this house like it was hers, like the world was something to explore instead of survive." Martha set down the cloth. "What happened? What always happens when men like me try to build kingdoms. The foundation cracks, and the people we love fall through." He picked up his jacket, preparing to leave, but paused at the doorway. "Thank you for not trying to fix her, Miss Chapin. Everyone else wants to fix her. They don't understand that she's not broken. She's just learning a language none of us speak." He left, and Martha stood alone in the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs, because Park Kim-jae had just given her something more dangerous than permission. He'd given her understanding, and understanding meant he might see her if she wasn't careful. She needed to be invisible. She needed to stay hidden. She needed to keep her past buried under layers of mundane work and forgettable competence. But the next morning, when she went to the courtyard at 5 a.m. and found Suri already there, sitting in the exact spot she'd occupied the day before, Martha made a choice that would unravel everything. She bowed to the child. A proper bow, teacher to student, equal to equal. And then she began to teach. Teaching Suri was like learning to speak in whispers through bulletproof glass. Martha couldn't use words because words required trust that didn't exist yet. She couldn't use touch because Suri's body was still a fortress that flinched at unexpected contact. So Martha used the only language that transcended both, the silent dialogue of movement and breath. The first week, they didn't train. They just existed in the same space. Martha would move through her forms while Suri sat cross-legged near the courtyard wall, watching with an intensity that would have been unnerving if Martha didn't recognize it for what it was. The child was memorizing, cataloging, building a map of how bodies could move with purpose instead of panic. On the 8th morning, something shifted. Martha finished her breathing exercises and transitioned into horse stance, the foundational position that taught your legs to become roots. She held it for 60 seconds, her thighs burning, her breath controlled. When she straightened, she found Suri standing 5 feet away, her small body attempting to mirror the stance. Martha's heart jumped into her throat, but she kept her face neutral. She moved back into position, this time slower, exaggerating the placement of her feet, the angle of her knees, the set of her spine. Suri adjusted, her movements tentative but determined. Her stance was too narrow, her weight distribution off, but she was trying. That was everything. Martha held the position, counted silently to 30. Straightened. Suri did the same, her legs trembling from the effort, a thin sheen of sweat on her forehead. Then the child did something that stopped time. She looked directly at Martha and nodded once. Permission, acknowledgement, the beginning of trust. They fell into a rhythm after that. Each morning at 5 a.m., Martha would arrive to find Suri waiting. They'd begin with breathwork, Martha's voice soft and steady as she counted in Korean, the language her own teacher had used. Hana, dul, set, net. Suri would breathe in sync, her small chest rising and falling in time with Martha's, learning that she could control something as basic as air entering her lungs. Then stances. Horse stance to build foundation. Forward stance to develop power. Back stance to practice defense. Martha never corrected with words. She'd demonstrate, and Suri would adjust. When the child got it right, Martha would bow slightly, showing respect for the effort. When Suri struggled, Martha would simply repeat the movement, showing that failure was just part of the process, not a judgment. By the 3rd week, Suri was following Martha through basic forms. The movements were simple, designed for children, but they required focus and coordination. Suri attacked them with a ferocity that made Martha's chest ache. This wasn't play for her. This was survival training. She was learning that her body could be strong, that she could occupy space with intention, that the world might be dangerous, but she didn't have to be helpless in it. Martha never asked why Suri didn't speak, never pushed for explanations or breakthroughs. She understood that silence was its own language, and some stories needed time before they could be told. Instead, she taught the child that strength wasn't about volume or aggression. It was about knowing exactly who you were when everything else was chaos. On the morning of the 21st day, everything changed. They were working on a new form, one that required balance and patience. Suri was struggling with a particular transition, her frustration evident in the tension of her small shoulders. She tried once, stumbled, tried again, fell. The 3rd attempt ended with her sitting hard on the stone floor, her hands pressed against her thighs in that grounding gesture, her breathing rapid and uneven. Martha recognized the signs of an approaching meltdown. She'd seen it before in the kids she'd worked with, the moment when the body's stress response overwhelmed the mind's ability to cope. Most adults would rush in, try to soothe, make it worse with their desperate need to fix. Martha did something different. She sat down on the floor across from Suri, mirroring her position. Then she placed her own hands on her thighs, fingers splayed, and began to breathe in the exaggerated rhythm she'd taught the child. Slow inhale, slower exhale, counting in Korean. Hana, dul, set, net. Suri's wild eyes found Martha's. Found something steady in the storm. Her breathing started to slow, matching the rhythm. They sat there for 5 minutes, just breathing together. And Martha watched the panic drain from the child's face like water finding level. When Suri's hands finally relaxed, Martha spoke for the first time since they'd begun training. Warriors fall. That's how we learn where the ground is. Suri stared at her. Then, in a voice so soft Martha almost missed it, rough from months of disuse, the child whispered. Again. That single word shattered and rebuilt Martha's entire world. She bowed deeply, tears burning behind her eyes that she refused to let fall. Again, she agreed. They stood together, and Martha guided Suri through the form once more. This time, when Suri completed the transition, landing in a stable stance, Martha allowed herself to smile. What neither of them knew was that Park Kim-jae had been standing in the shadow of the 3rd-floor window for the past 15 minutes, watching his silent daughter speak, and realizing that the woman he'd hired to dust his shelves had just accomplished what an army of therapists couldn't. Park Kim-jae began arriving at his office an hour late every morning, and his underboss Kang noticed. Kang noticed everything, which was why he'd risen through the ranks, why Kim-jae trusted him with the operational details of an empire built on strategic intimidation and carefully calculated fear. But trust was a relative concept in their world, and lately, Kang's questions felt less like concern and more like reconnaissance. "You seem distracted, Hyung-nim," Kang said during their morning briefing. using the honorific that denoted respect and hierarchy. "Is everything well at home?" Kim Jae looked up from the report spread across his desk, his expression carefully neutral. "Everything's fine. Why do you ask? You're never late. Not in 15 years. Now it's every day this week." Kang's smile was sharp. "If there's a problem with security at the estate, I should know. We can't afford vulnerabilities." The word vulnerabilities landed with intentional weight. Kim Jae heard the subtext clearly. In their world, weaknesses weren't just liabilities. They were invitations for enemies to strike where it hurt most, and everyone knew Kim Jae's greatest weakness wore pink pajamas and hadn't spoken in 8 months. Until 3 days ago. Kim Jae had heard her voice through his office window, that single word again, cutting through the morning air like a blade through silk, and something fundamental had shifted in his chest. His daughter had spoken. To a woman he'd hired from an agency, a woman whose background check had revealed exactly what Kim Jae had expected to find. A history of domestic service, clean references, a simple story of escaping a bad situation in Chicago. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that explained how she'd reached his unreachable child. "There's no security issue," Kim Jae said evenly. "I've been dealing with some personal matters. They're handled now." Kang's eyes flickered with something Kim Jae couldn't quite read. Curiosity? Calculation? Personal matters. "I see. And the new housekeeper, Martha Chapin? She's working out well?" Kim Jae's hand stilled on the report. "Why are you asking about her?" "No reason. Just thorough." Kang shrugged, but the gesture felt rehearsed. "Mrs. Kang mentioned she's been spending time in the courtyard, early mornings. I wanted to make sure she understands the boundaries of her position." Something cold settled in Kim Jae's stomach. "She understands perfectly, and her activities during her personal time are none of your concern." "Of course." Kang bowed slightly. "I'm just looking out for your interests. You know how important discretion is in our line of work." After Kang left, Kim Jae sat in his office and stared at the city spreading out below his windows. He'd built this empire through careful control, through understanding that power came from knowing more than anyone else and revealing less. But watching Martha move through those forms with Suri, seeing his daughter mirror movements with a focus she hadn't shown since before the incident, Kim Jae realized he knew nothing about the woman living under his roof. That evening, he did something he hadn't done in years. He went home before dark. The house was quiet when he entered, the usual oppressive silence that made him feel like he was disturbing a tomb every time he walked through his own door. But there was something different now, a shift in the air, subtle but present. He heard water running in the kitchen, the soft clink of dishes, and he followed the sounds like they were coordinates leading him somewhere he needed to be. Martha stood at the sink, her back to him, washing vegetables for dinner. She'd changed out of her uniform into simple black pants and a gray shirt. Her natural hair pulled back in a bun. Her movements were efficient, economical, the same controlled precision she brought to everything. But now, watching her, Kim Jae saw what he'd missed before. She didn't move like someone accustomed to service. She moved like someone trained to assess and react, her body positioned so she could see the doorway's reflection in the window, her weight balanced on the balls of her feet, ready to pivot. She knew he was there, had probably known the moment he entered the house, but she didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge him, just continued her work with the same steady rhythm she used with his daughter. "She spoke," Kim Jae said, his voice rougher than he intended. Martha's hands stilled in the water. "Yes. How?" She was ready. Martha turned then, drying her hands on a towel, and met his gaze directly. "Sometimes people just need someone who isn't afraid of their silence." Kim Jae stepped closer, close enough to see the water droplets on her forearms, close enough to catch the faint scent of soap and something underneath, something clean and grounded like earth after rain. "Who are you really, Miss Chapin? And don't tell me you're just a housekeeper. I've seen housekeepers. You're something else." Martha held his stare, and Kim Jae saw calculation flash through her dark eyes, the split-second decision between truth and protection. "I'm someone who's trying to be different than I was. That's all you need to know. That's not enough. It's all I'm offering." She set the towel down with deliberate care. "Your daughter is finding her voice again. Do you really want to interrogate the person helping her do that, or do you want to let it happen?" The question hung between them like a challenge and a plea simultaneously. Kim Jae realized he was standing too close, that the kitchen suddenly felt too small, that this woman was looking at him like she could see past the empire and the reputation straight into the hollow space where he kept his failures. "I'm watching you," he said quietly. "I know." Martha's expression didn't change. "You've been watching from the window every morning for a week. Suri noticed on day 3. Kim Jae felt heat crawl up his neck, a foreign sensation. He didn't get embarrassed. He didn't get caught off guard, but this woman had somehow inverted his entire sense of control, and he didn't know whether to fire her or fall to his knees and beg her to save what was left of his family. He turned and walked out of the kitchen before he could do either. The shift in the household was subtle enough that most wouldn't notice. But Martha had spent 2 years reading environments for threats, and she saw the signs clearly. Mrs. Kang watched her with increased scrutiny. The other staff members, 2 cleaning women and a cook, gave her wider berth in the hallways, and Kang, Kim Jae's underboss, had started appearing at the estate during hours he'd never visited before. He came on a Thursday morning, arriving just after Kim Jae left for the city. Martha was in the library, dusting shelves that didn't need dusting, when she heard his voice in the foyer. Smooth, deferential when speaking to Mrs. Kang, but with an undertone that made Martha's instincts flare. "I need to inspect the security system," he was saying. Mr. Park requested a full audit. Martha moved to the doorway silently, staying in the shadows where she could observe without being seen. Kang was impeccably dressed, expensive suit, and polished shoes. His posture relaxed but his eyes sharp as they swept the space. He was cataloging, assessing, looking for something specific. Mrs. Kang nodded, clearly uncomfortable. "Of course. Though Mr. Park didn't mention anything to me about an audit. Last-minute decision. You know how he is about security." Kang's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'll start with the 3rd floor and work my way down. Shouldn't take more than an hour." He moved toward the stairs, and Martha retreated deeper into the library. Something was wrong. She'd seen enough covert operations to recognize when someone was using legitimate access as cover for surveillance. Kang wasn't here to check security systems. He was here to gather intelligence. On what, exactly? Martha waited until she heard his footsteps on the floor above, then moved through the house with purpose. She found Suri in her usual corner of the 2nd floor sitting room, working on a puzzle, her small body tucked against the wall where she felt safest. The child looked up when Martha entered, and something in Martha's expression made her stand immediately. Martha knelt down, bringing herself to Suri's eye level, and spoke in the low, calm voice she used during their training. "We're going to play a game. I need you to go to your room, lock the door, and don't open it for anyone except me or your father. Can you do that?" Suri's eyes went wide, fear flickering across her face. But she nodded, trusting Martha in a way that made Martha's chest constrict with protective fury. The child gathered her puzzle pieces quickly, efficiently, and moved toward the stairs. Martha watched until she disappeared, heard the soft click of the bedroom door, the turn of the lock, then she went hunting. She found what she was looking for in Kim Jae's study on the 3rd floor. Kang was behind the desk, his hands moving through drawers with practiced efficiency, photographing documents with a phone that looked far more sophisticated than a standard device. He wasn't checking security. He was stealing information. Martha stepped into the doorway. "That's an interesting way to conduct an audit." Kang's head snapped up, his expression flickering from surprise to calculation in less than a second. He straightened slowly, sliding the phone into his pocket with deliberate casualness. "Miss Chapin, I didn't realize you worked on this floor." "I don't, but I heard someone moving around up here, and Mr. Park was very clear that this space is off limits to everyone." Martha kept her voice level, professional, giving him room to retreat. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding." Kang's smile turned cold. "I have full access to this house. Mr. Park trusts me with everything. Can you say the same?" The threat was clear. He was reminding her of her position, her replaceability, the vast distance between a temporary housekeeper and a man who'd been Kim Jae's right hand for over a decade. But Martha had faced down threats that made Kang's posturing look like amateur theater. "Then I'm sure you won't mind if I mention to Mr. Park that you were going through his desk," Martha said. "Since you have full access, it shouldn't be a problem." Something dangerous flashed in Kang's eyes. He moved around the desk, closing the distance between them, using his height and presence to intimidate. "You're very observant for a maid. Makes me wonder what else you've noticed. What else you might share with Mr. Park during your little morning sessions with his daughter." Martha's blood went cold. He knew about the training, which meant he'd been watching, gathering information, building a file on her just as surely as she'd been reading the household dynamics. "I teach her breathing exercises," Martha said. "Hardly worth reporting." "Is that all?" Kang stepped closer, close enough that Martha could smell his aftershave, see the calculation in his expression. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're inserting yourself into a very delicate family situation. building trust, creating dependency. That's dangerous, Miss Chapin. For everyone involved. Is that a threat? It's advice. From someone who's been protecting this family long before you arrived. He moved past her toward the door, pausing at the threshold. Mr. Park values loyalty above everything. But loyalty requires knowing where someone's true allegiances lie, and yours are still a mystery. He left, his footsteps echoing down the stairs, and Martha stood in the study feeling the weight of exposure settle on her shoulders. She'd been careful. She'd maintained her cover, kept her past buried, done nothing to draw attention beyond helping a traumatized child. But Kang had seen through it somehow, recognized that she was more than she claimed to be. The question was why he cared, and what he planned to do with that information. Martha pulled out her phone, a burner she kept hidden in her room, and sent a single text to a number she'd hoped never to use again. 3 words that would either save her or destroy everything she'd built. Need a cleanup. Then she went to check on Suri, because whatever was coming, she needed to make sure the child was protected first. That was the only thing that mattered now. When Kim Jae came home that evening, Martha was waiting in his study. She'd made a decision that terrified her, but lying to him now would be more dangerous than the truth. "We need to talk," she said. "About who I really am." Kim Jae closed the study door behind him with deliberate care, the kind of controlled movement that preceded either violence or revelation. He didn't sit, didn't pour himself a drink, just stood there, his jacket still on, his eyes fixed on Martha with an intensity that would have made most people confess to crimes they didn't commit. "You have 60 seconds, he said, "and I'll know if you're lying." Martha had rehearsed this conversation a dozen ways in her mind. None of them felt adequate now, standing in front of a man who'd built an empire on reading people's weaknesses and exploiting them. But she'd learned in Chicago that half-truths were more dangerous than lies. So she gave him the only thing she had left to bargain with: honesty. "My name is Martha Chapin. That part's true. I'm from Chicago. Also true. What isn't true is that I left because of a bad relationship." She kept her voice steady, her posture open. "I left because I failed someone I was supposed to protect, and I couldn't live in the same city where it happened." "Failed how?" "I ran a program for at-risk youth. Self-defense training, discipline, giving kids tools to survive environments that were trying to destroy them. I was good at it. Saved a lot of lives." Martha's throat tightened, but she pushed through. "Then I lost one. A boy who trusted me, who did everything right, who walked out of my class one day and died 3 hours later in a situation I should have prepared him for but didn't." Kim Jae's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. The understanding of someone who knew what it meant to carry bodies you couldn't save. And the program? Who funded it? This was the part that could get her killed. Martha met his gaze directly. "Government contract. I wasn't just a teacher, Mr. Park. I was a specialist. They brought me in when traditional methods failed, when the kids were too damaged or too dangerous for standard intervention. I had clearance, training, and a track record of turning potential assets into functional citizens." Assets. The word came out flat. Dangerous. "You're telling me you worked for intelligence, adjacent to it." "I didn't run operations. I rehabilitated people who'd been burned by them." Martha took a breath. "When Marcus died, I walked away, destroyed my credentials, buried my history, took the most boring job I could find because I needed to be someone who didn't carry death in her pocket. I came to New York to disappear. And yet here you are, teaching my daughter combat techniques in my courtyard." Kim Jae moved closer, his presence filling the space between them. "That doesn't sound like disappearing. That sounds like someone who can't help but do exactly what they're running from." She needed help. She needs therapy, doctors, time, not a burned operative playing savior to assuage her guilt. His voice was sharp now, cutting. "You used my daughter to make yourself feel better about your failure." The accusation hit like a physical blow, and Martha felt her composure crack. "No. I taught her that her body doesn't have to be a prison. I showed her that silence can be strength instead of survival. And I gave her something no therapist in the world could give her. Proof that she's not broken, just adapting to a world that hurt her." Martha's hands clenched at her sides. "You want to fire me? Fine. But don't pretend it's about what's best for Suri. It's about you being terrified that someone else reached her when you couldn't." The silence that followed was suffocating. Kim Jae stared at her with an expression that cycled through rage, pain, and something darker that Martha couldn't name. Then he did something that shocked her completely. He laughed. It was a bitter, hollow sound that had nothing to do with humor. You think I'm angry because you helped her? He shook his head. I'm angry because you're right. I've thrown money, specialists, the best resources I could buy at my daughter's trauma, and nothing worked. Then you show up, a woman with secrets and a background you won't fully disclose, and within 3 weeks she's speaking again. Do you understand what that means? It means she trusted me. It means I failed her so completely that a stranger succeeded where I couldn't. Kim Jae turned away, his shoulders tight with tension. Kang came to see me today. He's concerned about your influence in the house. Says you're getting too close, that you might be a security risk. Martha's stomach dropped. And what do you think? I think Kang's been asking too many questions about you. I think he's paying too much attention to someone who should be beneath his notice. Kim Jae turned back, his eyes hard. I think my underboss is either protecting me from a legitimate threat, or he's threatened by something you represent. And I don't know which scenario terrifies me more. What do you want me to do? Kim Jae studied her for a long moment, and Martha saw the war happening behind his eyes. The need to protect his daughter versus the need to trust his instincts about the people he let into his life. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and commanding. You stay. You continue with Suri. But from now on, you report directly to me. Everything you observe, everyone who asks questions, any interaction that feels wrong. You're my eyes inside this house now. He stepped closer, close enough that Martha could see the exhaustion carved into his features. And if I find out you're playing me, if any of this is a setup or a con, I won't fire you. I'll make sure you disappear in ways that make your government training look like kindergarten. Do we understand each other? Perfectly. Good. He moved to the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Miss Chapin, thank you. For giving my daughter her voice back. Whatever your reasons, whatever your past, that matters. He left, and Martha stood alone in the study, realizing she'd just made a deal that bound her to this family in ways that went far beyond employment. She'd wanted to disappear. Instead, she'd been pulled into the exact kind of dangerous situation she'd been running from. But when she checked on Suri that night and found the child sleeping peacefully instead of curled in the corner of her closet, Martha knew she'd made the only choice she could live with. Some things were worth the risk. The text from her contact arrived at 3 a.m., the notification lighting up Martha's dark room like a warning flare. She read it twice, her stomach nodding with each word. Background solid. But Chicago PD has inquiries active. Someone's pulling your old files. Professional job. Be careful. Martha deleted the message and stared at the ceiling, her mind racing through possibilities. Someone was digging into her past with enough skill to access sealed government records. That level of access required either law enforcement cooperation or serious money and connections. In Kim Jae's world, that narrowed the list considerably. Kang. The realization settled over her like cold water. He wasn't just suspicious. He was building a case, gathering ammunition to present to Kim Jae at exactly the right moment to maximum damage. The question was why? What did he gain from exposing her? Martha dressed in the dark and made her way downstairs. The house was silent, the kind of oppressive quiet that made every footstep feel like a violation. She moved through the first floor, checking windows, testing locks, doing the security sweep her training demanded. Everything was secure. Everything except the growing sense that she was missing something crucial. She found it in the kitchen. A tablet left on the counter, screen still warm. Mrs. Kang's device, forgotten in her evening rush to leave. Martha knew she shouldn't look. Knew that crossing this line would make her exactly what Kang accused her of being, someone inserting herself where she didn't belong. But survival required information, and information required risks. She opened the tablet. No password, which told Martha everything about Mrs. Kang's relationship with technology and security. The email app was still logged in, and Martha scrolled through recent messages with growing dread. There, an exchange between Mrs. Kang and someone identified only as S.K. The messages were brief, coded, but Martha had spent enough time reading operational communications to understand the subtext. The girl is progressing, speaking more each day. Target is noticing. Good. Continue monitoring. Report any changes in routine. The housekeeper is the catalyst. Should we be concerned? Already handled. She'll be gone within the week. Martha's blood ran cold. Mrs. Kang wasn't just staff. She was reporting to someone, providing intelligence on Suri's recovery. And that someone, S.K., had plans for Martha's removal. The timeline was accelerating. She photographed the messages with her burner phone, cleared the browser history, and returned the tablet to its exact position. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled, but inside she was calculating exit strategies and threat assessments with the clinical precision of someone who'd done this before. Suri. She needed to protect Suri first. Martha climbed the stairs to the second floor, moving past Kim Jae's room where she could hear his steady breathing through the partially open door. She paused outside Suri's room, listening. The child was awake. Martha could hear the soft rustle of movement, the particular quality of conscious silence that was different from sleep. She knocked quietly, 3 soft taps that had become their signal. The lock clicked, and Suri opened the door, her small face pale in the dim hallway light. She looked at Martha with those 2 knowing eyes, and Martha saw the question there. Is it bad? Come with me, Martha whispered, quietly. They went to the courtyard, the only space in the house that felt like it belonged to them. Dawn was still an hour away, the sky that deep purple-black that came before transformation. Martha sat on the stone floor, and Suri settled beside her, their shoulders touching in the easy proximity they'd developed over weeks of training. Do you know why I teach you breathing first? Martha asked softly. Suri shook her head. Because when everything else is chaos, when the world feels like it's breaking apart, your breath is the only thing that's completely yours. No one can take it from you. No one can control it but you. Martha demonstrated, the slow inhale and exhale that had centered her through every crisis she'd ever faced. And when you control your breath, you control your fear. Are you afraid? Suri's voice was still rough, each word carefully chosen, but she was using it more now, speaking like someone remembering how to trust that words wouldn't be used against her. Martha considered lying, considered giving the child false reassurance that adults were supposed to provide. But Suri had been lied to by silence for too long. She deserved truth. Yes. I'm afraid that people who want to hurt your father might try to hurt you to get to him. I'm afraid that I won't be strong enough to stop them. And I'm afraid that teaching you to be a warrior might not be enough when what you really need is to be a child. Martha turned to face her. But fear doesn't mean we stop. It means we prepare. Will you leave? Suri's question was barely audible. Not by choice. But if someone makes me leave, I need you to remember everything I taught you. Not just the movements, the breathing, the center, the way your body knows how to be calm even when your mind is screaming. Martha took Suri's small hands in hers. Promise me you'll practice. Every day, even if I'm not here. Tears welled in Suri's eyes, and she threw her arms around Martha's neck with sudden, desperate force. Martha held her, feeling the child's heartbeat against her chest, and made a silent vow that whoever was targeting this family would have to go through her first. They stayed like that until the sky began to lighten, until Martha heard footsteps on the floor above. Kim Jae, starting his day. Martha released Suri gently, wiping the tears from the child's face. Go get ready for the day. And Suri? Martha waited until the child met her eyes. If anything feels wrong today, if anyone asks you questions about me, or makes you uncomfortable, you find your father immediately. Don't worry about being polite. Don't worry about interrupting. You run, understand? Suri nodded, fear and determination warring in her expression. She hugged Martha once more, fierce and quick, then disappeared into the house. Martha stood alone in the courtyard as dawn broke over New York, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. She'd come here to hide from her past. Instead, she'd walked straight into a situation that required every skill she'd tried to leave behind. Somewhere in this house there was a traitor, and Martha had less than a week to find them before whatever Kang was planning came to fruition. She pulled out her burner phone and sent another message to her contact. 3 words that would either save them all or confirm that she'd never really escaped Chicago at all. Need full workup. Kang, underboss, Korean syndicate, everything. The response came 30 seconds later. That's going to cost you. Martha looked up at the window where she knew Kim Jae stood watching, the man who commanded an empire but couldn't protect his own daughter from the monsters in his organization. She thought about Suri's small arms around her neck, the trust that had been given to someone who'd promised herself she'd never be responsible for another life. She typed her response. I'll pay whatever it takes, because some debts were worth dying for. The information arrived in pieces over the next 48 hours, each fragment more disturbing than the last. Martha's contact was thorough, pulling threads that connected to networks she'd hoped never to touch again. She read the files in her locked room at night, committing everything to memory before burning the printed pages in the courtyard's fire pit. Kang wasn't just Kim Jae's underboss. He was positioning himself for a coup, had been for the past 2 years. The messages, Mrs. Kang sent weren't going to Kang directly but to someone identified as S.K. Seo-Kwan, a rival syndicate head who'd been circling Kim Jae's territory like a shark scenting blood. The connection was elegant in its cruelty. Kang fed intelligence to Seo Kwan while maintaining his position as Kim Jae's most trusted advisor, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And Suri was the key to everything. The files revealed what Martha had suspected but hadn't wanted to believe. The incident 8 months ago, the one that had stolen Suri's voice, hadn't been random violence. It had been a calculated message. Seo Kwan's men had staged a home invasion specifically when Kim Jae was away, making sure Suri witnessed enough to traumatize her but not enough to kill her. The goal was to break Kim Jae's focus, make him vulnerable through his daughter's suffering, create an opening for Kang to consolidate power while his boss was distracted by domestic crisis. What they hadn't anticipated was Suri's resilience, or Martha's arrival. The final piece of information made Martha's blood freeze. There was a scheduled meeting in 3 days at one of Kim Jae's legitimate business fronts, a shipping warehouse in Red Hook. Kang had convinced Kim Jae it was a negotiation with a neutral party to expand their operations. In reality, it was an ambush. Seo Kwan would be there with enough firepower to end the Park dynasty permanently. Martha had 72 hours to decide whether to run or fight. Every instinct screamed at her to grab Suri and disappear. She had the skills, the contacts, the resources to create new identities and vanish into a life where Korean syndicates and government handlers couldn't find them. It would be clean, safe, the smart choice. But when she went to the courtyard that morning and found Suri already there, practicing her forms with the focused intensity of someone who'd found purpose in discipline, Martha knew she couldn't run. Not this time. Not from this child who'd learned to trust again because Martha had stayed. "Your stance is getting stronger," Martha said, watching Suri move through the sequence they'd been perfecting. "You're not thinking about the movements anymore. You're feeling them." Suri completed the form and turned to Martha, her expression serious. "Teacher, why does my father look at you the way he does?" The question caught Martha off guard. "What way?" "Like he's trying to solve a puzzle that keeps changing shape." Suri tilted her head, and the gesture was so achingly childlike that Martha's chest tightened. "He watches you when you don't see. He asks me questions about our training, but really he's asking about you." Martha knelt down, bringing herself to Suri's eye level. "Your father is a careful man. He's learned that trust is dangerous in his world. So he watches everyone, trying to figure out who's safe and who's a threat." "Are you a threat? To his enemies?" "Yes. To him and you? Never." Martha brushed a strand of hair from Suri's face. "But sometimes the line between protection and threat gets blurry, and people can't tell the difference." "I can tell," Suri said with certainty. "You make the scared feeling smaller. That's how I know you're safe." Before Martha could respond, she heard footsteps. Kim Jae emerged into the courtyard, dressed for the office but moving with less purpose than usual. He stopped when he saw them together, his expression cycling through emotions Martha was learning to read. Longing, regret, something else that looked dangerously close to hope. "Good morning," he said, his voice careful. "I'm sorry to interrupt." "You're not interrupting," Martha replied, standing. "We were just finishing. Actually, I was hoping to speak with both of you." Kim Jae moved closer, and Martha noticed the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. "I have a business meeting in 3 days. It requires me to be away for most of the evening. I'd like to arrange for additional security here while I'm gone." Martha's pulse quickened. He was walking into a trap, and he had no idea. She needed to tell him, needed to break her cover completely and explain everything she'd learned. But doing that would expose her contact, burn bridges she might need later, and potentially make things worse if Kim Jae didn't believe her. "That's probably wise," Martha said neutrally. "Where's the meeting?" "Red Hook. Just a negotiation with some potential partners. Routine." He looked at Suri, his expression softening. "I don't like leaving you, but this is important for our future, for making things more stable." Suri moved to her father and took his hand, a gesture of affection that clearly shocked him. "You'll come back?" "Always." Kim Jae knelt down, cupping his daughter's face. "I will always come back to you, I promise." The promise felt like a blade twisting in Martha's gut because she knew what he didn't. That meeting was designed to make sure he broke that promise permanently. After Kim Jae left for work, Martha made a decision that would either save them all or destroy whatever remained of her credibility. She pulled out her phone and called the one person she'd sworn never to contact again. "I need an operational team," she said when the line connected. "Full tactical support, and I need it in 72 hours. "Martha?" The voice on the other end was familiar, laced with surprise and concern. "We had an agreement. You stay disappeared. We stay out of your life. The agreement's void. I've got a Korean syndicate war about to erupt in Red Hook. a civilian asset that needs protection, and a man walking into an ambush who doesn't know he's the target. Martha's voice was steady, despite the chaos screaming through her mind. I'm calling in every favor you owe me. Every single one. Silence stretched across the line. Then, send me the details. And Martha? This puts you back on the grid. No more hiding after this. I know. Martha looked up at Suri's window, where she could see the child's silhouette watching the city wake up. Some things are worth the exposure. She ended the call and went inside to find Suri. They had 3 days to prepare for a war the child didn't know was coming. 3 days to turn a traumatized 8-year-old into someone who could survive if everything went wrong. 3 days to prove that sometimes the most dangerous choice wasn't fighting or running. It was standing your ground and refusing to let the people you'd learned to love become casualties in someone else's war. Martha found Suri in the library, and when the child looked up, Martha spoke in the voice she'd used in Chicago when training kids for battles they shouldn't have to fight. We need to talk about what happens if your father doesn't come home. The warehouse in Red Hook was exactly what Martha expected. Industrial, isolated, perfect for an ambush. She'd spent the previous night mapping every entrance, every sightline, every tactical advantage Seokwan's men would exploit. Her contact had come through with a 4-person team, former operatives who owed her enough to risk involvement in what was technically a domestic criminal matter. They were positioned in the shadows now, waiting for her signal, but Martha wasn't there. She'd made a different choice, one that terrified her more than any firefight ever had. 3 hours before the meeting, Martha had done something unprecedented. She'd walked into Kim Jae's office and laid out everything, the files on Kang, the messages from Mrs. Kang, the intelligence about Seo Kwan's planned ambush. She'd expected rage, denial, accusations that she'd manufactured the evidence to serve her own agenda. Instead, Kim Jae had listened in absolute silence. Then he'd picked up his phone and made a single call. Now, Martha stood in the Park Estate's fortified safe room with Suri, watching multiple screens that showed the warehouse from every angle. Kim Jae had gone to the meeting, but not as a victim. He'd gone as a strategist who'd just learned his most trusted advisor was a traitor, and he'd brought his own very specific form of justice. Is my father going to kill them? Suri asked quietly, her hand gripping Martha's. Your father is going to give them a choice, Martha replied. The same choice he's making right now. On the screen, Martha watched Kim Jae enter the warehouse. Kang was already there, along with 6 men Martha recognized from the intelligence files as Seo Kwan's enforcers. The setup was obvious, brutally so. They weren't even trying to hide their intentions anymore. Hyungnim, Kang said, his smile sharp. Thank you for coming. I believe you know Mr. Seo. Kim Jae looked at the rival syndicate head, then back at Kang. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, controlled, deadly. I know many things now, including that my daughter's trauma was purchased, that her silence was part of a business strategy, that the man I trusted with my life has been selling it piece by piece for 2 years. Kang's expression flickered. I don't know what you've been told. The housekeeper I hired turned out to be more than she claimed. Much more. Kim Jae pulled an envelope from his jacket, tossed it on the table between them. She's very good at finding information people want hidden. Tell me, Kang, how much did Seo pay you to destroy my family? The room exploded into motion. Seo Kwan's men reached for weapons, but they were already too late. The doors burst open, and a tactical team that had nothing to do with Martha's contact flooded in. Federal agents, Martha realized with shock. Kim Jae hadn't just learned about the betrayal. He'd made a deal. Through the audio feed, Martha heard Kim Jae's voice, clear and final. I'm done building empires on blood. I'm done watching my daughter grow up in fear because of choices I made before she was born. So here's what's going to happen. You're all going to federal prison for racketeering, conspiracy, and attempted murder. And I'm going to walk away clean because I just handed them the evidence to dismantle 3 syndicates. Kang lunged forward, rage overriding survival instinct. But the agents subdued him before he made it 2 steps. Seo Kwan stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. You're dead, Seo spat. You can't walk away from this world. They'll hunt you. Your daughter. My daughter, Kim Jae interrupted, his voice dropping to something arctic, is under federal protection now. As am I, part of the deal. We testify. We disappear. We get to actually live instead of just surviving. He looked directly at one of the cameras, and Martha knew he was speaking to her. All of us. The feed cut as the arrests proceeded. Martha stood in the safe room, her heart hammering, trying to process what had just happened. Kim Jae hadn't chosen empire. He hadn't chosen violence. He'd chosen surrender to something bigger in exchange for the one thing that mattered. Freedom. Suri squeezed her hand. Does this mean we're safe? Yes. Martha knelt down, pulling the child into a hug. It means you get to be a kid now. A real kid. No more hiding. No more fear. And you? Will you stay? Martha heard footsteps on the stairs. Kim Jae appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 federal marshals, but alive, whole, choosing them over everything he'd built. He looked at Martha with an expression that held exhaustion, relief, and a question he couldn't quite ask. She stood, still holding Suri's hand, and answered the question anyway. I'm not going anywhere. We're a package deal now. Kim Jae crossed the room and pulled them both into his arms, and Martha felt something fundamental shift in her chest. She'd spent 2 years running from the person she'd been, trying to bury the skills and instincts that defined her. But standing here, protecting this family, she realized she hadn't needed to become someone different. She'd needed to find people worth being herself for. 6 months later, Martha stood in a courtyard that belonged to a house in a city she couldn't name, in a life protected by federal witness relocation. Suri moved through advanced forms with the grace of someone who'd transformed fear into power, her voice strong as she counted in Korean. Kim Jae watched from the doorway. No longer a syndicate head, but something infinitely more dangerous to the men who'd once feared him. A father with everything to lose. He caught Martha's eye and smiled. And in that smile was every choice they'd made to get here. Every risk. Every moment of trust when trust should have been impossible. Martha bowed to Suri as the child completed her form. The girl bowed back, grinning, then ran to her father. Kim Jae lifted her up, spinning her in a circle that drew delighted laughter from them both. Later, after Suri was asleep, Kim Jae found Martha in their new courtyard. He took her hand, threading their fingers together in a gesture that still felt new but increasingly right. No regrets? He asked. Martha thought about Chicago, about Marcus, about all the lives she couldn't save and the one she could. Only that we didn't find each other sooner. We found each other exactly when we needed to. He pulled her closer, and Martha let herself lean into him, this man who'd chosen vulnerability over power. Thank you. For seeing what I couldn't. For saving us. We saved each other, Martha corrected. That's how family works. And in the golden light of a sunset in a city with no name, 3 people who'd survived impossible things discovered what came after survival. They discovered home. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else matters more than the fear itself. And there you have it, fam. A love that rewrote destiny, a warrior who found her purpose, and a choice that proved the strongest empires aren't built on power, they're built on the people brave enough to walk away from it. If this story grabbed you by the heart and refused to let go, hit that like button to let me know you felt every single moment. Subscribe because we're just getting started with stories that'll change how you see love, loyalty, and what it really means to fight for the people who matter. Drop a comment telling me which moment devastated you most. I read every single one. And remember, the best revenge against a world that tries to break you? Building something beautiful with the pieces. Until next time, keep choosing courage, keep choosing love, keep choosing the battles worth fighting.